Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, March 20th, 2025. This is episode 340, and we're going to talk about a critical theory as sort of a celebration of the Department of Education being abolished. So you may have already heard big news today that the Department of Education, I guess Trump signed something which basically ended the Department of Education. And so it's gone from the federal level. And so money and authority goes back to the states. And so now you'll have 50 different uh, ways of approaching education. And hopefully from it, people will share ideas, look for best practices, and then go from there. Hopefully, there'll be a lot more competition within the states as well, making it easier for private schools to survive and increase more competition, especially for funding with the public schools. In other words, instead of the public schools getting, automatically all this money, but for there being healthy I don't know if we should be celebrating that private schools get more state money because there's a lot of strings attached. But, just a step in the right direction, and I'm sure the people who are directly involved will come up with ways to sort of take advantage of this great event, right? So people have threatened to do something about the Department of Education, but interestingly, it's Donald Trump who signs an executive order to bring an end to the federal Department of Education, right? What it will become on the state level, who knows? Will someone bring it back in the future? Possibly. But hopefully, because he's doing it so early in his administration, people will get so used to it not being there that people will say, yeah, there's no need to bring it back. Uh, Hopefully, it also means that people will become more aware of different educational approaches. There is some competition out there, but a lot of people don't even really think about it. Especially, hopefully, more people move away from the quote, teach me who to hate mindset, which I did an episode on not that long ago. And that comes from critical theory. And that's why we're going to talk about critical theory. Or at least for schools to teach students how to navigate this whole critical theory phenomena. Okay, so I asked AI. Okay, yeah. I used AI just to see what it would say, but also they give you links, right? So it was a Google search and they have it right there for you, but they have links to show you where they got the information. And so a lot of this information is from Wiki or from encyclopedias as well. So, I don't mind using Wiki as long as, you also back it up with other research. But since I've researched critical theory and there was nothing really that stood out that was different. So here it is, the AI generated explanation summary of critical theory. And as I read each aspect, I'm going to comment on it. I thought about going through the whole thing first and then commenting on it, but then I thought that because it's more academic-y, that I would just do it as I go along so that there's not a lot to try to remember. So by the time I get to comment on it, you would have forgotten what was already said. So here we go. Critical theory originating from the Frankfurt School analyzes and critiques societal power structures, arguing that knowledge, truth, and social structures are shaped by power dynamics between dominant and oppressed groups, aiming for social transformation and emancipation. All right, so that's the general overview of what critical theory is. And so the Frankfurt School basically automatically, oh, it's a Marxist movement, right? So maybe you call it neo-Marxist, whatever, but it's the Frankfurt School and it is a variety of Marxism. And Marxism in generally in general, always analyzes things from the perspective of oppressor oppressed. And there you see it in the AI generated definition already. Power dynamics between dominant and oppressed groups, right? And this whole idea of power dynamics comes from Foucault, who's a French postmodernist, who then analyzes society from this rubric of power dynamics. All relationships are power dynamics, right? Some people have more power, they're the dominant, and the people who have less power, they are the oppressed, okay? Which is a really it's interesting if you don't think too much, right? Otherwise, you're like, okay, if you say so, what do you got? And so that's the perspective that they're using, and you can already see that there are problems with it because how they perceive power, and how to translate power too, all depends on your subjectivity, right? So, in other words, you could be wrong. And the reason why you have less power is because your behavior is not that good, or the things that you want to do are not as productive. And so that's why you have less power. But see, they don't look at it that way. They just simply say you're oppressed, right? So you're just as good, you're just as right as anybody else. But because you don't have the power, that's why you are oppressed. And so it gets really funny if you think about it a little bit. But I've been in classes in the graduate school, right, in graduate level education, where people just nod their heads and say, "Yeah, man, that's so deep." And I'm just like, "What? Are you serious? Okay, we're going to be superficial like that, whatever." And so that's the thing. When you get into this kind of ideology, people like to think that they're getting really deep into things. But I'm looking at them thinking, yeah, you're really all very superficial. It's all superficial, right? We're not going to go too deep because once you start asking more questions and you realize that, it's just extremely subjective, right? As soon as you change your subjectivity, all of this is invalidated. And building on that, then all knowledge is subjective, right? For them to say that knowledge, truth, social structures are shaped by power dynamics, well, basically what they're saying is that truth is subjective. It's the truth that I am superior to you, and so therefore I earn this position. I deserve to be in a higher position than you. And it's also changed the subjectivity. It says, no, I am unoppressed. I'm here because you happen to have more power than me, but I should be the one that has more power than you, right? And so, depending on your subjectivity, the truth is going to be different, as I've explained since the very beginning of this channel. Truth is subjective because the people whose perspective you are using, they are seeing things in a different way, right? And so they are trying to undermine the existing truth, the existing accepted truth. And even if they were right, the question then is, what do you replace it with, right? If that is not true, then what are you going to replace it with? And basically, they're going to propose to replace it with their subjective truth, right? And so basically, it's an exercise in hypocrisy, right? This whole Frankfurt School is an exercise in hypocrisy. And so the reason why so many people have rejected it, or at least through, in my opinion, Trump gets elected primarily because Harris and the Democratic Party are pushing this Frankfurt School type ideology on the United States, and people just don't like it. They reject it, right? They sense the hypocrisy in it. Okay. So that's just out of that. Let's go on to the core concepts. I'll pick it up a little bit more, but hopefully you're getting the idea of critical theory and just what it is and how bad it is. So a core concept is critique of power structures. Critical theory examines how power relations, often rooted in social, political, and economic structures, shape society and lead to oppression, right? Well, the thing is, you examine power relations and you say, oh, so this power relation is not fair, so we're going to change it, right? And flip it, perhaps, right? But that whole process is to establish a new power structure, right? And so the goal in and of itself is hypocritical, right? And so if a power structure is hypocritical simply because there are oppressor and oppressed, well, to replace it is simply to just change who is the oppressor and who's the oppressed. So you don't really solve anything. You just have massive social upheaval, which then opens the door to a lot of violence, right? And this is why a lot of people who take the Marxist vision of society always talk about violence, right? It's always about, all these social movements which end up burning things down, destroying property, pushing war. All of these things are extremely hypocritical. Okay. Because the goal, right? They're saying, oh, the problem is power by those people. So the solution is we get the power. So then we get to attack the people we want to attack, right? So the goal itself is hypocritical, especially when they talk about power structures. Social constructs, right? I've talked about, uh, race as a construct, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Well, social construct basically means that it doesn't really exist, but because we are going to talk about it in a certain way, we create the reality. It's almost like you're a Fed chairman and you're saying basically if you start talking about recession, then the recession will come. But it emphasizes that, so the core belief is that social constructs. It emphasizes that many aspects of reality, including knowledge and truth, are not objective, but are socially constructed and can be manipulated to maintain power imbalances. Well, okay, but again, you're going to replace the previous, social construct that can be easily manipulated to maintain power imbalances. You're going to replace it with something else that's socially constructed and easily manipulated. And so it's a kind of that's why through and through it's an exercise in hypocrisy. The next core concept in critical theory is emancipation, right? A central goal of critical theory is to identify and challenge systems of oppression to promote social justice and emancipation for marginalized groups. My master's thesis was about social justice, right? Because everyone around me kept talking about social justice, and I really was into figuring out what justice was, right? And so I wanted to know what justice was because I felt like I was living in an unjust system. So I wanted to know what true justice was. And people kept talking about social justice. So I said, okay, let's talk about social justice. And this was in the early 90s, yeah. And so through understanding social justice, then perhaps I can liberate myself, right? Forget about other people. I want to liberate myself. All right. So that's emancipation is a huge concept in critical theory, but emancipation is discussed in a generalized racial way, right? So, oh, the oppressed, we're all oppressed. Yeah, you're not all oppressed in the same way. Right. And a lot of people who are in this social movement come from a very wealthy background, thank you very much. And so they don't necessarily share in the type of experiences and privileges of the people that they believe they represent. So therefore, there are many exceptions, right? Because it's just all about generalization. It's all on this superficial, generalized level that there are going to be a lot of people who fall through the cracks, right? That the people who fall through the cracks are the exceptions. The people who are outliers, they don't fit neatly into that category, and so therefore they get left out. And basically, that means that this hypocrisy that is promoted by critical theory hurts many people. So, for example, when you talk about high school admissions or even college admissions, people are so fixated on African American test scores that they never look at or discuss in the headlines anyway, Latino, Latina test scores, and especially you never want to talk about Asian test scores, right? So that's the weird thing, right? So you talk about emancipation, but you talk about it in such a way that you bring harm to a lot of people. And a lot of people just don't really seem to be able to get their head around it. And especially most race theory always marginalizes Asians, right? And so Asians have to pick a side. Which is why you see so many Asians in the Democratic Party, right? Because a lot of them go to these Ivy League schools or they're college educated where they learn all this critical theory, and the logical choice is to become a Democrat. But of course, there are exceptions, like myself, right? And so it's like basically saying all Asians are good at math, right? So it's a generalization, right? Uh, and there are a lot of Asians who are not good at math. I would even wager that it's not that far different from any other racial demographic in terms of math ability. It's just that you have the family background that pushes studying instead of sports, studying instead of art. You know, you have this kind of phenomena, and so therefore that easily could explain success, perceived success, whereas other racial demographics are deciding and choosing to excel on the sports field or the court, if you will. So emancipation for whom, and is your result any less hypocritical than what you accuse the original to have been? Next core belief is dialectical reasoning and praxis. Critical theory uses dialectical reasoning, analysis, analyzing opposing ideas, and praxis, the combination of theory and action, to promote critical thinking and social change. Right? It sounds kind of neat, right? A lot of these big words here. But dialectic, right? You know, analyzing opposing ideas, but the way that I've read people use the dialectic, it's on the superficial generalities, right? Straw man argument level, right? But the dialectic, at least that my father showed me, is that you are getting more and more specific, right? So the dialectic is not supposed to remain on the level of generality, but rather it's supposed to take you into a more specific situation and understanding. In other words, it's supposed to bring clarity to what it is that you're discussing. But, you know, critical theory never does. Critical theory would rather stay on the general level. That way you can ignore exceptions. You can ignore the individual for the sake of the majority. The next core concept is ideology critique. So, critical theory seeks to expose and challenge the underlying beliefs and values that often remain unexamined in society, revealing how these ideologies shape social norms and influence perceptions. But again, how do they get there? Right? Their perspective also has underlying beliefs and values, right? Which will go unexamined, right? And so with that subjectivity, they're going to analyze, right, expose and challenge other people's beliefs and values while leaving theirs untouched and invisible. So they may be able to unseat an ideology as the dominant, universally accepted ideology in a community, but what do you replace it with, right? So, and my argument always is, well, you have them fight against each other, this ideology against that ideology, and you see which one is more successful. And if you have a voluntary choice, like this community over here is, you know, all about social justice, and this ideology over here is about individual freedom. Okay, now you see over time where people would rather want to live. Uh, and, you know, you can determine that by immigration or emigration, migration in general, property values, you know, things like that. So again, ideology critique, how'd you get there? Right? And what are you doing it with? If ideology critique is to show uh, and expose all these bad underlying beliefs, well, it has to examine itself then as well. Does it have any kind of underlying belief and values that actually, you know, undermine the lives of people? Okay, so that was on the AI generated thing, I'm going to close with a couple of thoughts. So, critical theory teaches people to engage in cherry picking ideas to construct a narrative or a story which validates specific conclusions, rarely beneficial to society as a whole. This is something I wrote a while ago, which is I'm reading to you. Anyway, so critical theory, the whole Frankfurt School is about constructing a narrative, right? Making a story. And in order to make your story, you're going to cherry pick ideas which fit your narrative, which, move your story along. But in the process, you're going to ignore all those details which would lower the validity or make your argument less convincing. So you leave them out. In the same way that a lot of what I already just read is generalization, which allows them to ignore exceptions and details. So critical theory, that's what it does. By telling the story, you get to naturally, right, tell the story in such a way people don't even notice that you left a lot of details out. Um, so this selective storytelling also pops up in all the different departments of the universe: economic theory, political discourse, journalism, science, right? It shows up everywhere. And that's primarily because of money printing, right? Because of inflation, right? Which is what I talked about yesterday. Now you can just throw money around to everybody, to universities, to promote certain ideas, right? To have departments and what is it? What is it? Or programs within your university fully funded in order to promote certain ideas on that campus, right? And that's all because of inflation that makes it possible, right? In other words, malinvestment or government subsidies result in a kind of intellectual moral hazard, right? And critical theory is moral hazard. So you fund it, right? No one cares about critical theory until now. You throw a lot of money at it. You have paid positions in it. So then people apply for those positions. And so now they have to perpetuate a lot of bad subjectivity. Maybe the Department of Education was funding a lot of this. Maybe USAID was funding a lot of it, but know for sure that it's getting funding from somewhere, not necessarily from private citizens, because the average private citizen would not kick in money for programs such as this. Generally, people do chase the money, right? And so if a school is going to offer a job, a tenure track position to promote, DEI, well, a lot of people are going to jump at that, right? Which they would not have if the position was never there. So the more trendy something is, then the more weak-minded, vulnerable gravitate there to belong, right? And it's a psychological thing, but there are a lot of people in society, for whatever reason, variety of reasons, they're not very strong-willed. And so they're vulnerable to following trends, especially if it's a trend which empowers them to call other people fascists or Nazis, while never examining themselves. It's kind of a cult. Is in religion departments all across America, you're not supposed to use the word cult anymore, uh, but we can, right? Uh, the expression they would rather use is new religious movements. But I think there's a fine line between a religious movement and a movement which takes advantage of people, right? At its core, that's what it does. It takes advantage of people who are weak-minded, who are vulnerable emotionally. We can say that the funding from the government promotes a lot of these bad ideas. So instead of people recognizing that certain life choices are wrong, uh, something like the Department of Education will throw money at them and say, no, 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 we need more of people like you. And so they become leaders that way. And it's quite intoxicating. And so that's why we have such a huge dumpster fire, with posing as education, right? So hopefully the Department of Education ending will stick, and then people will have to rediscover different methods of education, different styles of schools, and the student will benefit, hopefully, from this competition of school models, school ideology, and different approaches to education. But that's it. This episode in celebration brought to you by the abolition of the Department of Education. Talk to you guys next time.